Now, the first batch of Nigerian evacuees from Sudan were due to arrive home yesterday, Friday, but failed to do so owing to further complications to their story. After being driven for hours through some of the most dangerous terrains on buses arranged by the federal government, they arrived at the Egyptian border only to be prevented from crossing into freedom and safety by the Egyptian authorities, who reportedly demanded visas to allow the transit through the country. In the meantime, it has been reported that the Nigerian government is spending $1.2 million in the evacuation efforts. Earlier in the day, chairman of the Nigerians in the Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabiri, spoke to Rise News.
The 13 buses arrived Egypt quite at the border between Sudan and Egypt, but we met a challenge there. The Egyptians did not open their borders. First, they arrived about past 5:30 p.m., during which they had already closed. And then by the time they allowed 2 officials only to cross over, but they refused to allow, well, not just the Nigerians, there are about 7,000 nationals, people from various countries waiting there, but they refused to allow them to cross. They said they needed to have some clearance, some visas and all that. So unfortunately, those students have been in a bus for 3 days. The condition is actually very traumatic and traumatizing. But the information coming from our ambassador, I spoke with him just a few minutes ago, is the assurance that they have resolved whatever it is and told them, please allow them passage, because they're going to be escorted straight to the airport in Aswan and the plane will pick them up. So the assurance he gave again is that tomorrow morning, hopefully, they would have crossed the border. Now, when they cross the border into Egypt, they say have a 4 hours drive or 5 hours drive to Aswan International Airport, from which they will be carried back home. Now, an Air Force plane is already on standby to go there and pick them up. But here's the thing. You don't want to go if there's nobody to pick up, because you don't want to go just parking there. So as soon as the clearance is given, we have an Air Force plane that will actually hopefully leave very early tomorrow morning to go there. So that is actually the update, and it's not good news. It's not good news, but the hope is that they will be back anyway. So there are about 7, and there's a scramble, there's chaos, there's a very unpleasant sight at the border, because there are about 7,000 nationals all waiting to cross into Egypt. But however, there's still another major thing, which is the remaining buses. By now, the remaining buses, the NEMA said they paid for 40 buses. So if 13 buses have gone, there should still be 27 buses to be loaded. Now, what they are saying is that those 27 buses will probably start loading by tomorrow. There were issues of, payment or no payment. There are issues of, you must pay fully before we take off. And there were issues of the transporters hiking their fees for these services, because everybody wants the services. So that is another major challenge. Those buses really have not, they are beginning to arrive at the universities, but they have not started boarding any of our students. So that is the situation as of now. But again, NEMA says, and the ministry says, the buses will almost get there, but they are insistent, demanding. And I think the problem again NEMA is having is, how do you transfer money in a war situation? Again, the issue of money, I can't talk about it, because funds go to NEMA, humanitarian affairs, and perhaps foreign affairs, but I really can't talk about funds. But the key thing is, when are those buses should be bringing those, there are 27 buses left that should convey the remaining students in various campuses, or Nigerians. Some of them are not students. As a mother, as a parent, you don't want this to happen to any child. Apart from that, I'm talking to them. I'm communicating when there's service. I got a whole number. In fact, we want to open a WhatsApp line for them, but it's like, we'll keep saying it's almost over. So we're talking to them, communicating with them individually, and we also created a little space where we can have a conversation with them. But basically, we're communicating with a lot of parents. So it's actually traumatic for any parent. We're talking about children here that went in search of education. So it's really, really not a pleasant experience. But again, we're very optimistic that they'll all return safe and sound. Nothing has happened to any one of them, and nothing will happen to any one of them. But nothing should go beyond getting them in by tomorrow. Nothing. At this point in time, the minister he said he will be talking to his own counterpart in Egypt, or maybe even at the presidential level. That is the situation now, and from what they're saying, I guess by tomorrow morning, the first set should be leaving. We pray so, and we hope that those assurances will be reality.
Can see with everything that, of course, has been. Oh, so sorry. I'm so sorry. How did I do that? Well, I've been told that it was a, very, very, very difficult making the way down here. But of course, I have my co-host Steve Ayorinde looking not as stressed as his morning has been. Welcome to the studio, Steve.
Good morning, Shaita.
How are you doing today?
Very well. I'm okay.
Yes. All right. So we're just listening to, Abike Dabiri. She has, of course, been at the helm of affairs, trying to get the Nigerian students back. We know that the crisis in Sudan, of course, started on April 15th when the Sudanese army and the paramilitary RSF, both headed by army generals, couldn't agree on their terms of rule and just turned Sudan into a place of chaos. Now, bringing it down to how it affects us Nigerians, we had about 5,500 Nigerian students who were stranded in Sudan at the time, and the federal government had promised, after saying that they had put together $1.2 million for transportation to go into Sudan, pick up those students, bring them to the Sudanese border that is shared with Egypt, and bring them safely back to Nigeria. But it seems as if this particular process has been marred by so many controversies. First off, on Wednesday, there were reports that some of these students had shared videos online saying that the bus drivers had refused to continue the journey because they had not been paid. We were eventually able to, that was able to be solved. And as of yesterday, they had, on Thursday, they had gotten to the Egyptian border. And what we're hearing now is that they are not allowing them go through the border except they have their visas. In fact, it was also stated that the evacuation had been called off yesterday because some of the officials had fled from the Sudanese border. And most recently, the federal government has approved an aircraft in the fleet of the Nigerian Air Force, the NAFC 130H, for the evacuation of Nigerians that are currently stranded in Sudan. Now, in all of this, I am very concerned for the students because if we really think about it, they've been on the road since Wednesday. Today is now Saturday and they're stuck at the Egyptian border. Do you think that maybe this in itself was because of horrid planning? Why are we not seeing a situation where this aircraft and, of course, Air Peace that has come out to say that they are willing to send their own aircraft, why are they just going now when this has been happening since April 15th? Today is the 29th.
Yes.
Steve.
Well, I mean, this is without a doubt a national embarrassment, but I don't think that the blame will go to Madam Abike Dabiri in the manner that people have been, dealing with her. I think that this is a Nigerian government problem. It's the federal government dropping the ball. In terms of the evacuation, clearly there are two agencies involved, working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to some extent, the commission that Mrs. Abike Dabiri heads. I think what she has done, which is doing quite well, is to put herself forward as the voice for the Nigerian government about what is going on. That, of course, has implications, which is why a lot of people are now heaping up all the blames on her because she's the one that we can see. She's the one that we can engage with in the media and in public. Maybe because as a result of that, she feels overwhelmed as a woman, and therefore some of her responses on Twitter especially. I bet uncouth. I mean, let's be fair to Madam Abike. It's not an easy thing, particularly because you can't answer for NEMA. You can't answer for all the other agencies. All she's doing is try to get information and pass it across. Of course. When evacuation action like this happens, of course, you do not have the luxury of time. That is what everybody is dealing with. So on the one hand, we are dealing with the fact that we are usually not very tidy when it comes to, arrangements like this. And secondly, it shows clearly that because we do not have a national carrier, this present government has been promising for 7.5 years. The promises are still there that before May 29, Nigeria Air will still fly. Hopefully, maybe it will fly out of the laptop of the Minister of Aviation, and people will see. But that is what we are dealing with. Otherwise, why are other countries in Africa, including Namibia, etc., not to talk of Ethiopia, everybody, why are they able to quickly move in before the situation degenerated and were able to evacuate many of that things? I'm not saying, of course, that evacuation is very easy. All over the world, it's not. We saw what happened with the Americans in Afghanistan. It was messy. But then they got the job done. Air Peace chairman has always been a wonderful Nigerian, and we can see everybody is hailing, him with the offer that he has made, just like he did with the Ukraine and the Russian war. So what he has done is commendable. But of course, that's what the federal government needed. You can't rely on just Air Peace. You've got all your military apparatus, to move in there and do the needful. Maybe if they had done that, or they were seen to be thinking along that line, the hammer won't be that much on the federal government, and in particular on Abike Dabiri-Rewa. But what is happening over there is not just cool. It's not tidy. Let's hope that in the next couple of days, we'll begin to see that people are boarding planes and are coming back home to Nigeria. That is the essence of you being a government. If you are failing, it simply means that, there's no commendation for you. Hard knocks will come, and they will continue to come until somebody can put this thing together and do the needful. Thousands of Nigerians are there. They need to be back home. Definitely.
And just to quickly touch on this, I found this particular fact very interesting because, I actually got it off Madam Abike Dabiri's page. The fact that they had time to put the students on buses based on their state of origin. And that in itself is another completely a different topic. But I just find it interesting that in the midst of chaos and all of that, they were still able to do that, and that has really rubbed a lot of Nigerians off the wrong way, because it's supposed to be Nigerian students, not according to your state. I don't think the Sudanese paramilitary really care what tribe you come from. It's really about getting everybody out. But of course, at this point, we're really just waiting to see what the federal government can do to make sure that Nigerians are out. And what's more important is no Nigerian has died yet, based off of the information that we've gotten from them, and that is really good news.
Yeah. Yes. This state of origin thing, I think it was just a temporary, momentary thing, and again, Madam Abike was just basically trying to give real-time information. But of course, that won't sound nice in anybody's heads. What are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with 36 states? People are now being said, okay, if you are from Kano, if you are from Anambra, if you are from Oyo State, Lagos, enter the bus. That's silly. Nobody should have put something like that out. It should not have happened. But then, like I said, I think it was just a momentary thing. Once you're outside of there, whether you are representing Nigeria in terms of educational matters or sports or culture, you are a Nigerian. You didn't go there on the basis of the contingent of your state, And this is an evacuation process. It is not a march past thing that everybody will now fire behind, their coach or their prefect. No, I mean, we can't even have time for that. But apparently what happened was that one of the students was saying, oh, maybe they gathered together based on being friends and being from the same state, and they said, oh, we from a particular state, we are now entering this bus. And I think that a few people thought that they were now being arranged according to buses. In any case, 40 buses were meant to be there, but we had, as at the time of that particular report, it was only about 27 buses. So how could you have said that 27 buses will be labeled according to state? That can't happen. It shouldn't, it shouldn't happen, and they should discontinue with that nonsense.
Definitely. All right, then.
All right. So we'll proceed. Earlier in the day, Chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabiri-Rewa, spoke to Arise News. Meanwhile, fighting has been continuing in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, and the adjacent city of Bari, despite a renewed ceasefire announced by the army and a rival paramilitary force. Plumes of smoke can be seen rising above the capital. Each side blames the other for breaking the truce. At least 500 people have been killed and thousands have been injured. The violence has sent tens of thousands of refugees across Sudan's borders and threatens to compound instability across the region. The fighting has also reawakened a two-decade-old conflict in the western Darfur region, where scores have died this week. The rival generals have refused to negotiate despite global appeals for talks.
We came all the way from Khartoum because of the events of the fighting and the coup that took place. The fighting was close to the airport and it was time for our exams at university. The situation was very tense. We thankfully got out of this situation. May God have mercy on the martyrs, including our friend at the university, Abdullah, known as Jeddo. May God bless the souls of our martyrs of a duty, those who defended the country and our rights. We arrived last night from Khartoum to Port Sudan, after nearly 3 or 4 days of travel. We arrived to the port Huron by the Saudi embassy. They did not spare an effort. They provided us with food and drinks and everything. Things were unbelievably.
All right, so the Sudanese issue will continue to, for want of a better word, plague Africa. Sad day for that part of the continent, sad moment for Africa, and the generals who are involved, in this fight, in this battle, are not just relenting. Friends who came together in 2021, I believe, to truncate democracy. They worked together at that time. Now both are facing each other, exactly, to take control of power in that country. I think part of what should be concerning to us, particularly in Africa, it's not just the fact that, this is a struggle for power. It's about the enablement that those who profit from wars, warmongers, globally, powerful global forces who apparently might be fueling, this particular conflict. And it looks like it won't matter to them whether it degenerates into another round of civil war, Sudan, being known for that sort of conflict, or if Africa suffers, in an unquantifiable way as a result of what is happening. So I think that beyond evacuating our citizens, yes, which is the normal first thing that every country should do, the most important thing, as it applies to Russia and Ukraine, should be how do we find permanent truce to this particular war, this particular conflict that looks like it's about to consume Sudan. Even when there's a ceasefire going on and it's been extended, violence is still rife on the street. You saw the story about how the Turkish, plane was hit, by bullets, on account of the fact that violence is still continuing on the streets. This is really sad, and I think that part of what Africa should do through the AU is to speak up, is to try and bring the warring, factions together, and of course to also speak clearly about the fact that those who might be behind this, those who might be fueling this, in terms of warmongers that are globally powerful, should desist from turning Africa into a theater of war.
Talking about, bringing opposing sides together, just monitoring what's been happening in Sudan on this website. This just coming in about 30 minutes ago, the Sudan paramilitary chief, Dagalo, demanding an end to army bombings, the campaign on the rival sides. He's saying that it can't hold talks to end fighting, of course, that has thrown the country into crisis. So it's looking as if, eventually, even though we're seeing an extension of this 72-hour ceasefire, maybe we're going to get to a point where these these two factions can actually say, because if it's a war-torn country and there's no one to rule and everybody's fled and you only have refugees left, there really isn't anybody else left to govern. So it might get really bad before it gets good again. We're looking at about more than 500 people that have already been killed and tens of thousands that have fled Sudan since the clashes. Of course, the international mediators are doing their best. We've also spoken about the African Union stepping in to see how they can put an end to this. And also, even for Nigeria as a country, looking to Sudan to make sure that we don't get to a place where, it deteriorates. We are in a good space right now. We've just come out of our general elections. We have our the inauguration coming up in May 29th, and it's a democratic rule. But the story of Sudan shows how quickly things can go from being okay to being really bad if certain forces are not checked. But let's move on now to our next story. President Muhammadu Buhari on Thursday said that Nigerian opposition parties lost the 2023 general elections because of their overconfidence in their abilities to win. According to the president, the integrity of the elections remains unquestionable, owing to the fact that his party, the All Progressives Congress, lost the opposition in its traditional strongholds. Buhari said that while APC was working hard to retain the presidency, the opposition parties were basking in the euphoria of false hope. He also criticized the opposition parties for failing to accept defeat. In his words, they were already telling their foreign backers that they would defeat the APC, and they are finding it hard to convince those who supported them from the outside why they are unable to beat them. Now, I was thinking that President Muhammadu Buhari was already talking about going back to his hometown. He was ready. He was not looking at Abuja again. He was ready looking at May 29th. So I'm wondering why all of a sudden he's, letting out such statements. Like I said, earlier, the inauguration is already around the corner. Unless, the judicial system between now and then comes out to say that for some reason, President-elect Bola Tinubu is not the president, then we can have that conversation. But I don't know. It almost seems as if he's just trying to whip up the hornet's nest and look for trouble. And of course, PDP, they are coming out to say that, that conversation in itself should be the reason why, President Muhammadu Buhari would have his visa banned. Do you think that those kind of words would reflect that kind of punishment, so to speak, on the outgoing president, Steve?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think what the president is trying to do is to consistently confer legitimacy on the conduct of the last elections. And this is the time that, at the twilight of his administration, this is the time that he reckons it is important for him to be clear about what his legacies are. And I think one of the key things that he has promised that he wants to go away with, is that he conducted free, fair, and credible elections. And he will look for every opportunity to continue to say that the elections were credible. He has now gone beyond that to also offer explanation
a reason
as to why the opposition lost. I do not know clearly, and we can't read it from the latest message of the president as to who is referring to. You really can't be referring to PDP on the one hand and Labour on the other hand, and to an extent, NMPP, because they didn't approach the elections in this, with the same strategy. If you're talking about external validation, maybe you are referring to Labour. If you're talking about being overconfident, maybe you're referring to PDP. But the president will be right by saying that we won because you didn't tidy your house. And that's very correct, because what the president is probably seeing is just PDP that has now gone into splinters.
Of course.
If PDP had been united, Obi was still there, and Kwakwanso in the north, was still with them. Maybe, just maybe, we never can tell. Maybe the strategy of the APC and Bola Tinubu will have been different. But with the PDP, fragmented into 3 places, and if you had the 5 governors
the G5 governors,
You could argue that there's no way, that the opposition as a united force, was going to be the APC. But then, hey, the petitions are in court. Let's see what the courts, make of it.
Definitely.